Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast series where we explore the fascinating history of the Indian Ocean world. In today's episode, we'll delve into the intersection of commerce, faith, and identity along two crucial regions in the Indian Ocean world, which are
The Malabar Coast, which will be covered by me, Tuan.
and the Swahili coast, which will be covered by me, Pragati.
yes, using insights from three core sources Sebastian Pranz's Monsoon Islam, John Middleton's The World of Swahili, and Edward Alper's The Indian Ocean in World History. We'll examine how trade, religion, and social dynamics shape the cultures of these regions. Joining us, Tuan, covering the Malabar Coast.
Thank you, Cindy, for having me over. I will be starting off with Monsoon Islam by Sebastian Pranch. While this book pretty much focuses on the Malabar coast of India as a key example of a literal society shaped by trade, intermarriage, and religious exchange, Islam spread along the coast primarily through merchants and not military conquest, which is fascinating, with Arab traders arriving as early as the 7th century CE. That while by the 10th century, Malabar was already recognized as a vital hub in the spice trade, the region's rulers, like the Zamrin of Calicut, welcomed Muslim traders and granted them privileges for their commercial expertise. A notable example of how trade influenced religious identity is the Mapilla Muslim community, formed through intermarriage between Arab merchants and local women. This community is quite deeply integrated into Hindu society and exemplifies what Sebastian Pranch terms the monsoon Islam, which is a term that encapsulates a commercial and pragmatic form of Islam that is spread by trade rather than any sort of conquest. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Mapilla merchants controlled much of Calicut's spice trade, and while you can see that in, for instance, the Charaman Juma Masjid, which is one of India's oldest mosques, it's believed to have been established in the 7th or 8th century after a local king practically converted to Islam. In addition to commerce, then, Malabar's trade is also connected into the Indian Ocean slave trade, with surprisingly enslaved South Indians being shipped to markets in the Persian Gulf. Isn't that very much, well, gruesome?
Yeah, there was quite a twist there. Um, Perhaps now we can shift to the Western Indian Ocean world, the Swahili coast.
So, today I'm going to focus on the world of Swahili by John Middleton. The Swahili coast, from Kenya and Tanzania to Zanzibar and Comoros, was a key trade hub connecting Africa to the Middle East, India, and China. Swahili towns acted as melting point for merchants arriving by land and sea, using the ocean as a vast network of roads, guided more by the skills rather than navigational tools. As middlemen, this Swahili facilitated trade connecting African producers with merchants from across the Indian Ocean. Goods like gold, ivory, and spices, and also enslaved people passed through their ports, fostering a melting pot of culture. The Swahili language, a Bantu language influenced by Arabic, reflects the hybrid identity shaped by African, Arabic, Persian, and Indian influences. Identity on the Swahili coast was defined more by the cultural assimilation than the race. Islam, introduced by Arab traders in the 9th century, shaped the region's identity, influencing political, economic, and legal systems. This Swahili coast also played a significant role in the Indian Ocean slave trade, with enslaved people from Africa sold to Arabia, Persia, and India. Zanzibar became a key center for this trade under the Omani sultans in the 18th and 19th century.
Yeah, while you guys have covered the Swahili and the Malabar coast, the source that I covered, Edward Alpers, provides a more comprehensive history of the whole Indian Ocean world. But one thing that I thought related to both of these is he provides detailed insights into the history of Western Indian Ocean. It's mentioned in the book that by the 14th century, Islam had become dominant, largely due to Muslim merchants. The concept of Ummah, united Muslims facilitating trade and cultural exchange across regions from the Gulf to East Africa and even South Asia. Islam's trade was closely tied to trade with Muslim merchants forming diasporic communities that blended into local societies. Similarly, practices like Sufism influenced local traditions, which can still be seen in Zanzibar's Kitimiri cult. Um, Islam gained prominence in regions like Swahili Coast, Gujarat, Malabar Coast, while spreading more slowly in parts of South and Southeast Asia. Cultural integration through trade and intermarriage, such as between Gulf merchants and local in Malabar, as presented by the monsoon Islam concept, was key. The spread of Islam was shaped by this migration, trade, adaptation, which created a fusion of faith, commerce, and culture.
So, as we sum up these ideas, it's clear that Indian Ocean was not just a sea of trade. It was a world of connections, faith, and evolving identities. From the coastal cities of Swahili Coast to the spice trade routes of Malabar, the flow of goods was accompanied by the flow of ideas, cultures, and religious practices. The Swahili Coast trade networks not only drove economic prosperity that shaped its society, but the region's polyethnic identity, Islamic influence, and involvement in the global commerce, including the slave trade, demonstrate how deeply interconnected the Swahili coast was with the wider world.
Right, and so connecting to that, Islam, as we have seen in actually all the three sources that we have discussed, played a quite central role in shaping the region's social, political, and I guess economic landscapes of these regions, as it can be seen as so dominant. And whether through peaceful trade on the Swahili coast or the integration of Muslim merchants into local societies on the Malabar coast, Islam was both a uniting force and a key component of the Indian Ocean's complex web of interactions that actually facilitated trade as well as slavery along the coast of circulation.
Okay, then. I have a few questions that I'd like to discuss with you guys. Namely, how do you think cultural exchanges and syncretism have contributed to the formation of these literal societies around the Indian Ocean? What can phenomena like the localization of major religions, such as we discussed, the arrival and adaptation of Islam, both in the Malabari Mapillas as well as in the Swahili communities, tell us about the evolving identities of these societies?
I do have, in fact, an interesting example for that. Assimilation and cultural adaptation are central to the formation of littoral societies, as you know. So, the coastal regions like the Swahili coast served as dynamic space of exchange where trade, migration, and intermarriage facilitated the blend of diverse traditions. Intermarriage, particularly between the Arab, Persian, and African populations, reinforced cultural synthesis by integrating foreign customs into the local traditions, shaping these social hierarchies and influencing the language, dress, and the religious practices of the region. So, the localization of major religions demonstrate how Islam was adopted to the existing African local traditions. Such phenomena reveal that littoral societies are not merely passive recipients of external influences but are actively engaged in cultural negotiation, creating hybrid identities that reflect both global connections and local particularities.
Yeah, actually, as I mentioned briefly, the Kitimiri cult of Zanzibar, it pops up quite often in Alpers readings. One example is the uh, 19th century Kitimiri cult in Zanzibar, described by a Catholic missionary in 1869. This women's healing spirit possession cult was linked to Kitmir, the dog guardian, the seven sleepers in the Quran. The possessing spirit was believed to come from Mahri via Pemba. The cult's protective symbolism, rooted in Omani and Hydrami influences, extended as far as Indonesia, reflecting the integration of these colonial and religious networks into local practices.
I just traveled back from Indonesia, and while it seems like a fascinating connection that I was able to see there too. In fact, the Mapilas, on the other hand, emerged from the conversion of low caste Malayali Hindus and the intermarriage between foreign Muslim traders and local women This blending of origins created a distinct socio-economic and cultural profile for the whole community, in fact. While the absence of a Muslim ruler in Malabar led to the development of local religious authority, with the ulama producing legal commentaries tailored to the community's unique needs. The role of the ulama, who are basically religious scholars in Malabar, was pivotal because they produced legal commentaries which, in Islamic terms, are fatwa, that address the unique social circumstances of Muslims living in a non-Muslim society. So pretty much as translation, culturally speaking. And so on the point of culture, the Mapila's use of Malayalam in Islamic ballads are the creation actually of Arabic Malayalam reflected localization of Islam as well as blending indigenous customs with many different various Islamic practices that circulated in this region.
Yeah, like as we talk about how there's an arrival of this new religion of Islam in these regions, I feel like it's interesting to think about how arrival of new religions may have interacted or clashed with existing ones. One example that I know of is like this dynamic that could be seen between the collaboration between Jewish Nakhuda Mahruz and Indian merchant Tinbu Sultan, who assisted Mahruz's brother in law after his ship was attacked by pirates along the Konkan coast. Mahruz even advised his relative to reach out to Tinbu for financial support to return to Aden. This kind of interreligious and intercultural cooperation speaks to the broader phenomenon of how such collaborations have shaped the Indian Ocean world, where diverse communities have often found ways to work together despite religious and cultural differences. At least this is what I think. But what are your thoughts on this interplay?
Well, to add on to your point, I think the Swahili coast offers a rich example of how Islam, introduced by Arab traders, meshed with the pre existing African belief system. This syncretism, rather than clashing, often created new forms of identity and practices, where Islamic religious practices were often integrated with local customs and traditions. For example, let's say the Kilwa community, one of the most prosperous Swahili city states during the medieval period, was a crucial hub in the Indian Ocean trade. The city state flourished as the center for the trade between the Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, and India. And also, the Islam introduced by the Arab traders became the dominant religion. So, but however, the practice of Islam on the Swahili coast was not a mere transplantation of Arabic customs. It was adapted to local context, forming a distinctive Swahili Islamic culture.
Well, this sense of interreligious intermingling, oh god, the wording is very playful. Well, it's also seen in the friction and adaptation as well as intermarriage within the Mapila communities, which are pretty much unfolded through several interconnected processes. While intermarriage and intermingling, once again, the tongue twister, was foundational because the very origins of the Mapila community lie in these practices. The source pretty much states that the main origins of the community were the conversion, especially of low caste Malayali Hindus to Islam, and in the liaisons of foreign Muslims with Malayali women. The term Mapila itself may be rooted in a Tamil word denoting a bridegroom, potentially referring to newcomers who married into local families. Temporary marriages, which in local context are called mutra, between Arab sea traders and Malayali women were reportedly common due to, pretty much long periods of travel. These unions often resulted in children who were brought up as Muslims, contributing significantly to the growth of the Mapila population. And this is really similar to a concept that we have explored before, which were, I guess, the monsoon husbands. Do you remember?
Oh, yes, I think it refers to this practice of seasonal marriages or liaisons formed between foreign traders, particularly, I think, Arab and Persian merchants and local women in coastal regions of the Indian Ocean, Swahili coast, be it South India. Um, these relationships were often temporary, coinciding with the traders seasonal stay in the region during the monsoon trading season. I think that's how it's got its name. And these unions typically resulted in, as you said, the birth of children who formed a mixed heritage, contributing to the development of unique and hybrid identities. Now, I have another question. Um, we can see a movement of people, like how we briefly mentioned the slave trade, be it these marriages, and then the eventually shaping and development of hybrid cultures and cosmopolitan communities in the Indian Ocean world. However, I want to bring our attention to the first movement of people, like the slave trade. How do you think the first movement of people have shaped this hybrid culture formation and cosmopolitanism in Indian Ocean world?
To answer that, I believe the migration and diasporas were crucial in shaping hybrid cultures along the Swahili coast. The Hydrami people from southern Arabia, or modern days known as Yemen, were particularly influential between the 10th and the 18th century, establishing trade and religious networks in the cities like Zanzibar, Mombasa, and Kilwa. Composed of merchants, religious scholars, and sailors, the Hadrami diaspora played a crucial role in linking the Swahili coast to the broader Indian Ocean trade, fostering a multicultural and cosmopolitan society.
Well, to add to that, though, a significant aspect of slavery, and well, to add to Cindy's point about forced movement, is that in the Muslim Indian Ocean world, it was a conversion of enslaved people to Islam that happened as a process of this forced movement. And this process not only integrated individuals into the religious community, but also exposed the dominant Islamic culture to a quite diverse perspective and range of interpretation. And so the story of the captured African king that we have covered, who learned Islamic practices and eventually propagated Islam in his homeland in Monsoon Islam, illustrates how the movement of enslaved people could actually contribute to the spread and adaptation of religious beliefs. And furthermore, we should also note that former slaves could become patrons of mosques, demonstrating their integration into the social and religious fabric of the community in a quite agential and active way.
Wow, this conversation was fruitful. So, with this, thank you, Cindy and Tuan, for such insightful contribution today. As we reflect on this rich history of Swahili coast, it reminds us of the enduring legacy of the Indian Ocean world. This legacy of cultural exchange, adaptation, and cooperation is as relevant today as it ever was.
Indeed. And the ongoing influence of these cultural interactions provides us with a unique lens, I think, through which we can better understand global interconnectedness.
Well, despite the quite abrupt transition to an end, and I hate to see you guys go like this, we can also see that Cindy's point that was raised was exactly what I was thinking. In fact, the formation of literal societies around the Indian Ocean, such as the Mapillas and the Swahili coast, highlights the dynamic and multifaceted nature of cultural exchange, syncretism, and adaptation. So, to sum up this discussion, I would say that through trade, intermarriage, and the movement of people across vast distances, the societies evolved into vibrant and multicultural communities. The blending of local and foreign religious, cultural, and social practices shaped unique identities that were deeply rooted in both local traditions and global interactions. The legacy of these processes continue to reflect the enduring impact of the Indian Ocean's interconnected network on the development of hybrid cultures and cosmopolitan societies. And as we continue ultimately to explore these fascinating stories, we hope that our listeners take away the importance of embracing diversity and the power of collaboration in creating strong, enduring communities. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.